Hey everyone, I'm Breanna from Boom and welcome to Boom Chat. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Sas Milledge, the magical cartoonist bringing you Mamo. Can Orla O'Reilly embrace her destiny in order to bridge the divide between humanity and the fairy world? Orla, the youngest in a long line of hedge witches, finds herself pulled back to her hometown after the death of her grandmother, Mamo. Without Mamo managing magical relationships between the townsfolk and the fae, the seas are impossible to fish, the crops have soured, and Jo Manalo's attic has been taken over by a poltergeist. Now, Orla and Jo will both be pulled into worlds they never wanted to be part of. Can the two girls work together to save the town? Can they, Sas? I don't know. What's going to happen?
Who's to say? I have no idea.
Well, I sure don't. But you know what? This concept and this world that you've built is so gorgeous. What inspired you to create this like cute small town coming of age story that also just like is sprinkled with magic?
Oh, thank you so much. I think I've been thinking about this, like what sort of inspired me. And like I started thinking about this story a really long time ago, sort of when I was still in like second or first year uni, and you're in that stage where it feels really like sort of, high school, and like the certain parts of your life are behind you and everything before you is kind of like deciding whether you're going to continue being the person you've kind of always been. And what does that mean? And going and trying to do something else. And it's kind of this really sort of weird, strange limbo state that I think I've actually realized extends long into your 20s and doesn't end in university. But I kind of started with that idea of having sort of this idea of a witch who was dealing with boundaries and liminal spaces, and that also reflecting in her personal life while she was going through a grieving period for her grandmother. So the idea that sort of she's lost this force in her life that was sort of both guiding and maybe sort of dictating where she would go in her life. And now that that's gone, what does that mean? And so the idea of the town kind of sprung up in much later stages of the book. Originally, she was sort of kind of a traveling witch, which she still is, but the idea of that she was sort of going to find somewhere that she also, well, not even find, sort of rediscover somewhere that she had grown up, actually came to me later on the idea that sort of like, if somebody is traveling, you kind of have to know where they're coming from and what they're running from. That's kind of the central question of her story. And so the town kind of came into being. It's loosely based on the town that my parents live in and that I sort of grew up in as a kid, which is a town in the southeast of Melbourne called Flinders. And so the landscape is very based on that, and all the landscape is kind of sort of Australiana, and the animals are Australiana in it. Not that there's like kangaroos and koalas hopping about, but mostly just birds and things like that.
No, but it's all gorgeous and lush and beautiful.
Yeah. It was always where I pictured when I read the Hobbit books as a kid. I always pictured it as being down there because it's called the Mornington Peninsula Shire as well. And so I was like, the Shire? You mean like in jail? Yeah. So, but yeah, so it kind of all came together around these experiences that, and it sort of came together in this kind of allegorical and sort of metaphorical way of trying to tell this story about Orla. And then Jo kind of came out of that on the basis of being a foil for Orla, and became her own really interesting character. That I was sort of like, originally I was like, she's facilitating Orla's story. And then as I was doing, I was like, the more I learn about her and the more that she is involved, actually, the more interesting Orla's story becomes. And actually they contribute much more to each other when they're both kind of on this journey of like where they're going from here and what their kind of sort of mission in life is, or what they want out of life.
I can't wait to see what the two of them are going to do, because I like to only read number one. And so I was just as surprised at the end of it. So I'm just like, oh, what is going to happen? But from there, I want to ask you, so you worked on a lot of other existing titles with some other publishers before. So I want to know, how has that experience been different from now working on your first solo original series?
Oh, totally different. Like totally different. I think mentally, it's a really different headspace. I was, previous to this book, I was working on a book for DC, The Lost Carnival, and that was like a really great experience and a really good way to kind of cut my teeth, sort of learning how to, how a graphic novel is made and watching people. But with that, I had a really sort of strong writer in Michael Morecci, and I had a layout artist in Phil Hester. And so it was like really, I had this really great supportive team behind me that I could kind of like build my work on theirs, and you had confidence in your work because you're building it on these people who are great. Whereas with this book, I have been like, I wrote the script, I'm doing layouts, and I'm doing inks, and I'm doing final pass on colors. I have a wonderful friend named Belle who is helping me with Belle Murdoch. Everybody should look at her stuff. She's great, helping me with colors. But pretty much you really just have to back yourself a lot, which is like, and obviously like I have a wonderful editorial team at Boom who are really supportive, and they obviously love the book, which is very encouraging. But it's, when you're sitting there alone in a room, just like working on something for hours and days and months on end, especially during a global pandemic, you do start to lose a bit of perspective on like why you're doing it and why this story of all stories. And you sort of get, I don't know, I think anybody who's finished a long-term project, you get to about halfway through and you're like, why is this what I'm doing? I could have done anything. And you just kind of drive yourself crazy. So it's harder, I think, mostly mentally, but from a creative perspective, it's really fulfilling in the sense that you get to kind of call the shots. But then also you get to get mad at yourself because you're the one calling the shots.
Well, and you're like, man, my supervisor's really really just riding it today. Like,
she will not leave me alone. Yeah. No, it's yeah. And it's like, it's when you're working from a script for other publishers, it's very easy to kind of get like, when I was in animation, I used to do this with the storyboard artist. Anybody, basically the person who is in front of you in the production line, you're like, this person had no idea what they were doing. Why have they done it this way? And of course, now that I am sitting in the seat of like, I wrote the script, I like will be doing the work, and I'll be like, why did I put this panel direction in here? This makes no sense. Like, what were you thinking? And so it's actually just figure out that, it's all just, it's hard work, but it's very satisfying work. And it's mostly just a battle of wills with myself.
But, so fun though. It's gotta be okay. So with all of this freedom to be super, super creative, what were some of the inspirations that you drew on for your character designs? And I also want to know if those birds are birds or if those birds are fairies.
So for character designs, I sort of like flew through a bunch of character designs for these girls. Like, again, I started this so if I was in first or second year uni, it would have been 2014, 2015. And so like this story has sort of seen a lot of designs, a lot of environments, a lot of different stories. And it's sort of like eventually kind of landed here. Ultimately, I think the designs for Orla and Jo came out of, I didn't want to do a really sort of overly heavy-handed visual metaphor for sort of night and day, but the idea would just be that like both of their color palettes are very much like Orla looks like a little sun for the most part. She is kind of just like a little, like she's got and Jo, on the other hand, all of her color palettes are generally sort of moody blues, purples, and greens, and that's kind of the idea of just sort of like reinforcing their kind of intrinsic oppositeness, which they're not total opposites, but they've really got a sense of push and pull between them. So that was kind of the idea between the designs. As for the birds, well, you'll have to find out. They are, I will say, they are birds, but there is maybe a little bit more than meets the eye with them.
All right, I see you. I'll keep an eye out for these birds. All right, so my next question is, this story is just, it's got so much beautiful lore and there, you can tell that there's so much history in it. Like there's so much information to just pull out of it. I can't wait to dive into it and learn so much more. I want to know, what kind of research did you do to make sure that the world felt as rich and as fleshed out as possible? And also, what inspired your version of witches and the fae?
So I was sort of like touching on this before. Like I was really into old like fairy tales, and like I loved Lord of the Rings as a kid, and I loved a lot of those like kind of those really those really dense fantasy books that came out in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yep.
That were like sort of like kind of cheap Lord of the Rings and not very good. Like I loved that stuff as a kid. I also really loved like Red Wall books and things like that. Like I used to live in the library because my mum used to pick me up from the library at 6 o'clock. So I would go to the library after school and just like spend hours just like reading anything, which I wish I could do that now. Now I have no attention span now. But so that kind of like sort of fairy tales and these like really allegorical stories and sort of like witches and kings and queens and things like that always really affected me as a kid. And so approaching the witches and kind of the folklore in this book, I was kind of looking to that sort of like sort of Anglo-Saxon, but also sort of Celtic and Gaelic sort of folklore, and very much sort of like what I've lost my train of thought now. Sort of very much trying to kind of tap into this idea of what did fairy tales and folklore do for the people who were telling them. And I really like, I think we've sort of Disneyfied fairy tales to an extent, in the sense the idea that they're made for children now. And, you know, like obviously Disney's films are very well loved, and like I've loved them myself. But I think like looking into the original folklore, like what kind of like, so often they didn't really have a moral, more often they had warnings. And it was a lot to do with this relationship between, like, especially when you look at stories with the fae, it was this relationship between sort of the unknown and powers that were kind of existed beyond the scope of the human world. And I was hiking in Scotland a few years ago, and we got lost. And it was really this moment of just like, it was sort of like 8 p.m. at night. Luckily it was summer, so the sun doesn't go down till like 10 p.m. in the north of Scotland. But we got lost and we were kind of in this marsh. And you do kind of like, we were kind of joking, like, you know, to the fae, if you're listening, please do not harm us. But it was like, we were kind of joking, but at the same time, you're sort of thinking like, I am really, you know, at a loss here. Like if we cannot find our way back to this path, because we basically got hedged in by the water, like, you know, what are we going to do? And you do sort of feel sort of beholden to the world around you, and the fact that you're like, I actually have no idea what I'm doing. And there are powers here that I cannot understand and can't anticipate. And I think it's the same with the Australian bush. Like I've always had a really big respect for, like I did a lot of hiking as a kid. I lived in the bush when I was, for a year when I was 15. It sort of really instilled in me, like the Australian bush is no joke. I always get annoyed when Americans are like, oh my God, Australia, you've got all those snakes and, you know, it's also dangerous. And it's just like, well, like, it's not really. Like, you don't see that many snakes, and generally they're going to run away from you. I've never seen a shark. Like, if anything, you guys have got like...
All right, but Sas, I got to talk, those huntsman spiders though.
Okay, no. Okay, so absolutely, I hate huntsmen. They're evil and they're awful and they are as bad as they seem. No. Okay. Cannot stand a huntsman. I didn't mention spiders. Spiders are evil and terrible. To be fair, huntsmen aren't deadly, but they are huge.
They're too big. They're the size of my dog.
Way too big. Yeah. Oh my God. Just like massive. And like, they just like hang out in your house, and they don't build webs. So they come out of, we can't get into this because I'm a serious arachnophobe. I cannot deal with them.
I can't do it either.
But having said that, they're not deadly. Whereas when you go out into the bush, you kind of much more, you're going to worry about exposure, like more than you're worrying about snakes or spiders or anything like that. Like, so it's just like the Australian bush is huge, and it is really changeable and really, like the weather is very sort of unpredictable, and you kind of just have to have a respect for it. In the sense of like, and like, you know, it's a lesson that white colonial settlers learned the hard way when they came to Australia, which was this is a terrifying and like harsh environment that you have to sort of have a healthy amount of respect for, and you have to know in order to kind of to sort of be able to live here in harmony. And I think like there is real sort of like in these sort of folk and fairy tales and in this kind of like relationship to nature that you see in sort of older stories, and the idea that there was sort of, you would have deals with the fae, and you know, you would have sort of a relationship with the fae that was kind of like you wouldn't cross them. I think that's a really good allegory for nature, and sort of all the way up to sort of global warming now, which is the idea that we kind of have grown this hubris that we can take what we want and there'll be no consequences. And I think that's sort of like that magic, that sort of thing is really speaks to the kind of magic that people use to fill in the gaps between sort of the unknown before we sort of had modern science and modern thing. And I think it still exists. Like when I am out in the bush, and I think a lot of people feel this, when you're out in the wilderness, you become kind of, you know, if not spiritual, you have this respect for the environment you're in. And I think that we as a, you know, like that there is not a huge amount about environmentalism in the book, but I think that sort of relationship to place and the places we live and the world we live in is sort of a microcosm for the way we are living in the world now, and what we're going to do about it.
Well,
kind of went off track there.
That is okay. I'm still really interested to see what Orla and Jo are going to do and the way that they're going to interact with the fae. And then, I don't know, the way that you're making me think that like magic is now like just a different version of science. And like, I've gone like off on this whole, you took my brain down this other road that I didn't think it was going to go down. But now I'm going to think on that one for a minute.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, science is like, I think the idea that science is something that answers questions is wrong. I think science is something that asks questions. Science isn't there to explain, like it is there to sort of explain the world in some way, but so was magic, and so was sort of storytelling. Like I was talking to a doctor recently and talking about storytelling. She's like, being a doctor is storytelling. Like talking to your patients every day about like whether you're talking about vaccines or you're talking about sort of like you are telling a story to your client that is what you want them to come out of that is to sort of like looking after their health and looking after their neighbors and she's like, it's a big part of what we do is storytelling. And like this idea that we have this whole branch of the sort of knowledge that is just like total and concrete and truth telling, when in fact, like most scientists will tell you, like, no, like what we are doing is like dealing with the unknown and asking questions and like really sitting with that, which I think, you know, writers and artists do a lot as well. Like I think it is the fundamental human experience.
Yeah. So Sas, speaking of storytelling, at the end of the first issue, we discover that Orla has a bit of a surprising connection to Jo's magical problem. Now, I don't want to spoil anything or give anything away, but what might we be able to expect for these girls after that revelation and, you know, finding out what their connection is? And are we going to be seeing any other supernatural creatures later, maybe?
Yes to supernatural creatures, absolutely. Without spoiling anything. Yeah, the sort of first issue is hinting at our major problem for the next 5 issues, which is, again, it sort of comes back to both Jo and Orla's relationship to the town and this town that they grew up in, but had very, very different experiences in growing up in, and exploring each other's relationship to the town and the way they feel that they do. And the magic is absolutely present. Some of the other creatures we might run into. So obviously there's some birds who have something to say. There's a couple trolls that show up. We've got a few more fairies and various other creatures coming through. And maybe a few more moths.
I'm so excited. Okay, so Sas, thank you so much for your time today. It has been So wonderful chatting with you and talking about all of this. For those of you watching at home, be sure to pick up Mamo #1, available online and in stores now. And if you want to stay up to date on all of our amazing content, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that notification button.